driven roller coaster. Today's episode is an incredibly important conversation about hereditary cancer, genetic testing, advocacy, and the power of knowing your family history. Our guest today is the founder of My Faulty Gene, an organization dedicated to educating and empowering individuals and families about hereditary cancer risks and access to genetic testing. After navigating her own breast cancer journey and discovering a BRCA mutation that ultimately changed and likely saved her life, she turned her experience into a mission to help others gain access to information, support, and preventative care. I'm happy to welcome Kathy Baker.
Hi, Jennifer.
Kathy. Hi, Kathy.
I'm so glad to be here. I loved that we were partners at exhibiting at San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium last year and got to know you. And we were both very busy at that conference, but I'm glad that you followed up and we've been able to continue the conversation.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start by, can you share a little bit about your personal cancer journey?
Sure. I could just start with my journey, but it actually goes back farther than my journey. My sister was diagnosed at age 32 with breast cancer, and we had a family history of cancer besides my sister. Our mother had 4 different primary cancers. Her father died of a very aggressive prostate cancer, and his mother died of pancreatic cancer. So we had a history, but at the time that I received a diagnosis in 2000 of breast cancer, there was not a lot of discussion about genetics and hereditary cancer predispositions. For me, my oncologist did suggest genetic testing at that point in 2000. However, it had only been going on for 4 years, and so there was not a lot of information. We didn't have a genetic counselor to talk to me about it, and he was a busy clinician. He asked, and kudos to him for asking and for continuing to ask, but I kind of looked at him like he had horns. You don't need my DNA, and just went on to trying to get past my treatment phase. I had stage 2B breast cancer. I'd had a lumpectomy, chemo, and radiation. And after some months or a year of treatment, I was cancer-free and wanting cancer in my rearview mirror. So I didn't want more discussions about the possibility of having a predisposition to cancer. So that was my initial diagnosis, but to continue on, I mentioned my mom had 4 different primary cancers, and she was legally blind, and she needed rides to her doctor's visits. And I've already explained that I wasn't really a compliant patient because I didn't do what my oncologist suggested with the genetic testing, and I would not have continued after my being declared no evidence of disease, cancer-free, except that I was taking mom to all of those appointments, the same doctor. And so every time I went, they were like, you need to come in for your checkup. And I'm convinced that he maintained that relationship and pestering me to come in for checkups long after many patients have quit. But for 9 years, literally for 9 years, he asked me at every appointment, every annual appointment, have you thought any more about genetic testing? And year 9, my mom was close to death. She died a few months later after my last appointment with him in 2009. And he had been given a study. It was Myriad Genetics had provided him with a study called the Metcalf study, and it was a study of 491 women with a known BRCA mutation. And of course, I didn't know if I had a BRCA mutation at that point, but it was 491 women with a known BRCA mutation who had had breast cancer. And the study was looking to see how many of those women would go on to get ovarian cancer. And it was very interesting. It said that 1 in 3 with a BRCA1 mutation who had had breast cancer would go on to get ovarian cancer. And for BRCA2, it was 1 in 7. So really, really high odds. So when he saw me at my appointment in 2009, he said, "You've got to test." He said the same to my sister, who was also his occasional patient. And my sister had already had her double mastectomy. She'd had a complete hysterectomy, so she didn't have the body parts that I still had that were still at risk that we could do something about. So I went ahead and I agreed. I agreed to genetic testing, and lo and behold, I had a BRCA1 mutation. I had the 1 in 3 chance of, according to the study, of having ovarian cancer. Knowing that, I knew I had to have risk-reducing surgeries. So I waited until Mom passed. It was maybe just a few months after learning that I had the mutation. And 6 months after having learned of my mutation, I had my risk-reducing surgeries. And I had them all done at once, 10 hours, piggybacked surgeries, because I wanted everything done at once and over with. I wanted it all in the rearview mirror. Had a double mastectomy, reconstruction of the breasts, and a complete hysterectomy with bilateral salpingo oophorectomy. And lo and behold, I had ovarian cancer. Unexpectedly. The symptoms of ovarian cancer are so vague. They call it the cancer that whispers, or sometimes the silent killer, because it's so often diagnosed late stage. And knowing me and knowing that my mom had passed and that I would not be back in that doctor's office again, that was his last shot getting me in there and getting me tested. And I did it just in time. The pathology report said 4 times in the pathology report, the pathologist said remarkable 4, and it was less than 0.25, excuse me, 0.25 millimeters from spreading into the peritoneal cavity. So I just dodged a huge bullet. So to me, at that point, I knew the importance of genetic testing, and I knew that my life had been spared. I really did. I knew I never would have presented with vague symptoms that would have presented late stage. So it was life-saving for me, and that was the beginning of changing my advocacy journey, where I had already been very involved with the American Cancer Society as an advocate. Generally, I'd chaired 4 Relays for Life and done a lot of things, a voice of hope. But I just, something changed for me.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. And so that really, did that inspire you then to create My Faulty Gene?
Well, it took a little while. That was, again, the year 2009, and I had to go through treatment again. I had to go through chemo again with the ovarian cancer. But once I was cancer-free, I was continuing to do the American Cancer Society volunteer work. And then about in 2020, in 2020, with the beginning of COVID and no need for the oil and gas industry work that I'd been doing for many, many years, everything was shut down. I knew that it was a time that I could kind of segue in my volunteer work into creating the foundation, My Faulty Gene, and I did that in early 2020.
Wow. Wow. And I can only imagine for you, it must have been extremely emotional when you learned you carried the BRCA mutation. Was that, I think so many people just, they're listening, may not realize how life-changing that information can be, not only for themselves, but for their families.
I think that the families is the key, because all of a sudden I realized that every first-degree relative of mine had a 50% chance of having that same mutation, because we all have 2 copies of the BRCA genes. We have one that we inherit from our mother and one from our father, just like they had 2. And so mine came through my mother, but she got one from her mother and one from her father, and undoubtedly she got hers from her father. It was a 50% chance, and I got mine from my mother. And all, I'm one of 5 children, and all 5 of us tested, and 3 of the 5 of us were positive for the gene variant, the pathogenic gene variant. And then over the course of several years, actually quite a few years, but all of my second degree relatives, with the exception of one, tested, and they were getting results that they needed as well. Also 2 of my 3 children shared my mutation. And
Wow.
so I have grandchildren at risk for also having inherited the mutation. So it's important information, but it's empowering, and knowing allows you to be proactive in your health care. And you get more surveillance than someone who doesn't have that, probably. And so I feel like they would catch anything that comes up, really quickly, because in an early stage, if there was a cancer detected. I mean, I've done most of the preventive stuff that you would do associated with a BRCA mutation, having had both my hysterectomy and ovaries removed and my breasts removed. But we can be on the watch for pancreatic cancer, which we are at risk for, and I am in a study called the PRECEDE Consortium, and I'm in a study, and they do an MRCP looking at my pancreas and my esophagus every year, and actually discovered that I have a precancerous condition in my esophagus. I have something called Barrett's esophagus, which I wouldn't have known about, and they wouldn't have known to look for any kind of cancer in my esophagus. So great to be able to, know that if there ever is something, that it will likely be caught early. And if I ever have any concerns, I just call, schedule an appointment, and they get me in.
Wow, that's great. So that would be very empowering to have that information, to know there's something you could do.
It is. And I also had something kind of interesting happen. I go to a Texas Oncology, which is part of U.S. Oncology, and that has been my cancer provider for all of these years, for 26 years. And but I also go to UT Southwestern for their genetics clinic, because that's how I was given access to the PRECEDE Consortium for looking at my pancreas. So as a part of that, they gave me a referral this last year to a cardio-oncologist, which come to find out, we do have that at Texas Oncology in my practice. I was just not aware of it and had not been referred. But the fact that I had breast cancer and had adriamycin, which is a very difficult, they call it the red devil. If you've ever heard of the red devil, that's the one.
Oh, yes.
Very difficult on your heart, and had radiated breast over my heart. So, they said, this is probably something that would benefit you to see a cardio-oncologist. Not that it's something that's needed for a long period of time, but let's give you a referral. I had the referral to the cardio-oncologist, and my cholesterol levels were normal. They did, the normal work on your blood work for the lipids. Cholesterol was great. But there was an additional test that she added, my cardio-oncologist added to the blood work, and it was called a lipoprotein A, looking for lipoprotein A. They also call it LP(a). And interestingly, just shortly after she did this test on me and learned that I did have an elevated lipoprotein A, the American Heart Association, and I think 6 or 7 other heart groups, ended up changing guidelines and making recommendations that every adult have a lipoprotein A test done at least once in their lifetime, because it causes sticky blood, causes calcification, causes heart attacks and strokes. And, she had looked at my family history, and the reason that's why she did it. My father had, my paternal grandfather had died at age 52 of heart disease. My father at age 60 had a heart attack and a quadruple bypass. He later also had a stroke. His only sibling had a massive stroke and died from that. So there was something going on, and she saw that. So what I didn't understand is how can you have a normal lipids, I mean, normal
Right.
cholesterol, and you're at risk? It's genetic. Who knew? And something else genetic. So
Wow.
when my score came back off the chart, she said, your first degree relatives all need to check. So we're in the process of that because this is a very recent thing. And one of my three children, only one of the three children this time, shares the risk for cardiac disease. The other two do not. And my siblings are also testing now. But what they do with knowing that, it's really interesting. But they, even though my cholesterol's normal, they want to have my LDL
Uh-huh.
half of normal.
Oh, wow.
So, yes, so I am now on taking a statin daily, and I'm also taking a shot every 2 weeks that is working to lower my LDL to half. So we haven't had our first test yet to see how much success we've had, but that's going to lower my risk of heart disease. So anyway, I know
That's
that was off
amazing.
subject, but you know what? It's something else genetic, something else that
Yes.
most people are not aware of, and so I thought it would be a good opportunity to share that because we all
That's
need to have
amazing.
that test, the LP little a or lipoprotein A test.
That's okay. I'm going to make a note of that for myself too. So, well, what about for listeners that may be unfamiliar as to what a BRCA mutation is and really why they matter? Could you share a little bit about that with us?
The function of the BRCA genes is to repair cell damage
Okay.
and to keep your breast, ovarian, and other cells growing normally. And when these genes have mutations that are passed from generation to generations, the genes don't function normally, and
Right.
other cancer risks increase. So it can account for anywhere somewhere around maybe 10% of all cancers that are related. All breast cancers could be related to a BRCA mutation. I've heard that as many as 25% of ovarian cancers could be related to some gene mutation, whether it's a BRCA or there's others as what besides BRCA. Um,
Right.
and so it's just really important to know if you are of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, you have a 1 in 40 chance of
Oh,
having
wow.
a BRCA mutation, which is extremely high. In the general population, I've seen the most common number is that 1 in 400 people would have a BRCA mutation, although I've seen that as many as 1 in 200. So somewhere in that range.
Wow.
So it is something that's a risk. And again, the knowledge of whether you have that is empowering. I know that my brother that shares my mutation, he has two children, and one tested positive and one tested negative for the mutation. And the daughter actually works in a oncology hospital. She's a oncology nurse, and during COVID, she was filling in for people in the infusion center, not her normal role at the cancer
Right.
center, but was filling in there, and she was seeing, in particular, she saw two young women in 25 years of age who both were pregnant and
Oh,
diagnosed with
goodness.
breast cancer. And I'm not making any kind of an opinion or talking about whether or not that increases your risk, but it did make her very aware that maybe she didn't need to wait until she was older. And so at age 27, she had her own double breast double mastectomy to reduce her
Right.
risk. And she's just had her second child, and at some point in the not too distant future, I'm sure she will also be taking care. She's being seen in a ovarian cancer clinic where she's being watched for her ovaries.
Okay.
But she will go forward with that risk reducing surgery as soon as she's completely finished with having her children. But again, think back, my sister was 32 when she was diagnosed. She actually was 31 when she presented with the lump in her breast, but the oncologist, I'm sorry, not the oncologist, her OB/GYN said, "Oh, you're still nursing." She had had a baby not long before, and it was attributed to that. But she continued to have the issue. It kept growing, and it was a solid year before she was finally diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer.
Oh, wow. I think that's, important. You mentioned something very important too, is knowing that you have a genetic mutation. You can then start thinking about fertility
Yes.
preservation. I think that's an important aspect that young women need to consider as well.
Yes, that is definitely, there's a whole area on that. We don't do a lot of focus on that. At My
Right.
Faulty Gene, we do educate. And talking about My Faulty Gene and starting our foundation, we wanted to educate. And there are many genes other than BRCA that put you at risk of cancer. And something that's notable is I've spoken before on many occasions to women who had BRCA only testing. And there are multi gene panels that are now available at the same cost of whether it's just testing for the BRCA genes or an expanded panel. And people who had tested negative for a BRCA mutation have gone back and learned that no, they thought they were home free and there was no genetic predisposition, but in fact it was a different gene altogether. And I've seen that happen over and over again. So it's really important when you have genetic testing to make sure that whoever is ordering it is not ordering it too narrowly.
And then I think that's a great point to know as well. And then can people retest?
Yes. As a matter of fact, genetic counselors, which is the very best source for doing any of this, is to go through a genetic counselor. But genetic counselors recommend that you retest about every 5 years because gene new genes are being identified, new mutations are being identified in each gene. So something that was not on the radar 5 years ago may now be on the radar.
Oh, that's very important to know as well. And I think a lot of people, genetic testing can sound really scary. Is there a way that you would recommend or to help individuals kind of move from fear into really empowerment with wanting to do genetic testing?
I'm going to use an example because everyone's in a different space, right? Not everyone is ready, whether it's because you're a male or a female and you think it's not, if you're a male and you think it's not going to apply to you, a lot of times males don't realize that they can pass that gene on to their children, just like my grandfather passed it on to my mother. But I have one of my children who did not agree to test for many years. And finally, he did. And when he told me, I was like patting myself on the back. I thought, oh, I finally got through to him. Yay. And I asked what it was, and it was not me. He said, we're expecting our first child, and I want to know. And so sometimes it takes something like that. It's an outside event because he's a very private person. Many people are. They're concerned about their information getting out in the public, and they don't want that to happen. And then there are, but there are protections. There's a Genetic Information Act, GINA, that protects you against being discriminated against by your employer as a result. I mean, you can't be denied. I'm not saying that right. Okay. Let me back up. So GINA is a law that was put in place a number of years ago that protects people with respect to genetic testing and being able to access that testing. If there are, I think it's either 15 or 25 employees of a company at least, then they have to not discriminate against you on the basis of that. which is very, very helpful. That being
Yes.
said, that's with regard to health insurance, but there is no protection with regard to life insurance or disability insurance. So if you are concerned that you might have that mutation and you want to get that life insurance or disability insurance in place before you test, that's often a good idea, and we talk to people about that quite often. I know that Florida may be the only state where they do not discriminate against you with regard to life insurance. I think
Oh,
the
wow.
rest of the states do, or there may be some movement in going in that direction in other states, but I know for sure that Florida does not discriminate with regard to life insurance, but all others do. And all of that being said, and I got life insurance put in place after my diagnosis with my second cancer, but it was rated up. It was available, but it was rated up and it was higher, but it was
Right.
available.
Okay. Can you share with me just a little bit about what does my faulty gene do? I know you're very active, very busy with it, so just let's share a little bit about what you do.
Well, this week I'm feeling like all I do is travel, but that's really not the case. What we do is we educate and assist, but part of our education and the reason that I do travel is because we also educate doctors. We go to many medical conferences and we put a face to hereditary cancer. We talk about how we're impacted. We are able to share our stories and help them to understand the importance of addressing this with their patients. And I mean, even AACR, which is, sorry,
You're fine. American.
yeah, I mean, it's the American Association for Cancer Research,
Research,
AACR.
yes.
Many people are like, why in the world would you go to AACR? That doesn't even make sense because you're not really talking to clinicians there, you're talking to researchers. And there are a lot of clinicians that come to hear the latest research, so you do get some clinicians there and oncologists. But I am just shocked at how many people in research have no clue about hereditary predisposition to cancer. So it's wonderful to be able to share that information with them and to help them to understand. And even just in March, when I was at AACR in San Diego, a couple of the gentlemen researchers that stopped by on different days at our exhibit, and we were talking, both of them were BRCA2 positive. And as we were talking, so they did know about it, but they really weren't attuned to their substantially increased risk of prostate cancer. I think with BRCA2 is the highest risk for a male having prostate cancer. It's something like 62 or 63% chance.
It's a big increase.
Quite a big chance, big risk. And after telling them about it, I told them about a study that was going on at the NIH where they would bring you out to the NIH for a MRI of your prostate every other year, and on alternating years, you would do your PSA test at home. They were both really intrigued about that and wanted information. I texted it to him right then and there, and just later in that same week, I'd flown from San Diego to Chicago to another genomics conference where I was speaking, and I also exhibited at that conference. And a woman came up to me and asked if, as part of my faulty genes education, were we talking about cancer trials and studies? And I said, well, not really. I mean, because Force does an amazing job with that and is much better equipped to do that. We're small. I said, but we do occasionally have an opportunity, and I gave the example of earlier in the week talking to the two researchers. Well, it turned out it was this woman, she got so excited. It was her study, and they had already called the same week.
Oh my goodness.
So, we do occasionally, are able to help and educate in that way. But primarily, we are educating about the different genes, the different risks associated with those genes, We share lots of stories because we think stories are the way to reach people when they, for instance, if you learn you have a mutation that puts you at risk, maybe you don't have cancer, but you learn that you have a genetic predisposition to cancer, the doctors always give you a letter and they'll say, you need to tell your family members. This is the family letter, let them know. But across the board, the people who are responding to that, those first degree relatives and certainly further out, they're not testing. I think I've seen really abysmal percentages, sometimes as low as 10% is all that are testing, and you're at a 50% risk, and you have an opportunity to know you're the low-hanging fruit on the tree, and why aren't you testing? So we've created lots of stories. We filmed stories through a video initiative called Family Gene Share, and it's a separate separate website address. It's called Family Gene GENE Share SHARE .org or .com. Either one will get you there. But we have a listing of different gene mutations, and then if you click the button, it shows a bunch of different stories, and you can learn firsthand how that gene has impacted different people. We have more BRCA stories than any. We do also have a lot of Lynch syndrome stories, because that Lynch syndrome is actually a higher risk than BRCA. 1 in 279 people walking around here in the U.S. have a risk of having Lynch syndrome, and only 5% of them know it. So it's not as well known, and it's very important because it puts you at a very high risk of uterine cancer if you're a woman, or colon cancer. So there are things that you need to be doing and screening you need to be doing. If in the perfect world for me, everyone would get tested. I'm very much a population testing. I think everyone should know, especially if it's something that's actionable. And I think that's the fine line. If it's something that you can be proactive about and make a difference in, you should know about it. So I really encourage people to do genetic testing. And as we have funds available, we do provide assistance with genetic testing for people who are perhaps they're not meeting criteria for their insurance company, or maybe they're even uninsured. We don't have a lot of money to do that, but we try to find it for people who need that assistance.
That's great. So for listeners out there that want to learn more about what you do and connect with your work, how could they do so?
Our website is myfaultygene.org, and we're also on social media. We're on also on LinkedIn. Our primary account on LinkedIn is under Kathy Baker, but it's also My Faulty Gene. But it's under My Faulty Gene, both in Instagram and Facebook. We're going to be expanding soon to some of the other social media outlets, but we haven't done that yet. So stay tuned on that. But at least for now, we have quite a few viewers. We are on track to, as of right now, we're on track for this year to have more than 6 million views of our
that's amazing
stuff online. So yeah, we do have a pretty good audience.
That's great.
And we share things about cancers that are not just hereditary cancers, because we think that's important, because people are always looking to read and hear about cancer. It affects all of us. And we feel like if you are searching for that information and you start following us, you're going to also learn about hereditary cancer, something that you might not have known.
Right.
And we might get you there because of something regarding a breast cancer that's not, perhaps a hereditary, but you might stay and learn something. And we do find that most of the people stay that come and follow us.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for spending your time sharing your story, sharing about My Faulty Gene and all the important work that you're doing. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for what you do. And I appreciate the opportunity always to talk about the importance of genetic testing. And, you know, I've started doing something the last few years that some people might think is kind of strange, but at the end of the year, I'll create a video. One year I did it and shared it, but it's been several years ago. But since then, it's just for me. What were the big things that happened this year? And then I look at it and I think, this is what I would have missed had it not been for genetic testing. I would have missed the birth of my grandchildren. I would have missed the marriage of one of my sons. I would have missed so many things. But I didn't have to miss them because I knew. And it's so important, and I'm so thankful to be here.
That is so important. I want to thank everybody for listening to today's episode. I think conversations like this remind us how powerful awareness, education, and advocacy truly are. And just a huge thank you again to Kathy Baker, to My Faulty Gene, and the incredible work that they're doing to help families to better understand hereditary cancer risk and access to life-saving resources. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with someone you love. These conversations can truly save lives. And be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and join us next time for another meaningful conversation.